And another prominent Star Trek actor appears to have gone out of his way to disrespect the fans. From bounding into comics, Jonathan Frakes on Star Trek Picard critics. They're watching to make sure they hate it. And here we go again. Let's get into this as we shake our heads in disappointment. Number one actor Jonathan Frakes recently appeared on GalaxyCon's Facebook livestream. During his conversation, the actor and director discussed plenty of issues related to Star Trek. One that stuck out was his views on fans who are critical of CBS All Access's Star Trek Picard. And the key word there is, once again, fans, also known as customers. How well has attacking customers worked out in recent years, Frakes? It might be advisable to do some research. Frakes discussed fans who are critical of the show while reflecting on his own experiences during the convention circuit. He told a story about his first convention, right after the premiere of Star Trek The Next Generation, and the hostile crowd he faced. Question: how hostile was it? And it seems that you've ignored the differences between the context then and the context now. Jonathan Frakes discussed initial reaction to The Next Generation. At the beginning of the discussion, Frakes is asked about what it felt like to enter the weird, strange world of fandom. That's what fandom is, I'm sorry to let you know. He answered, "The first convention I ever did was in Syracuse, New York, and it was in the winter of 1987, and the show, I think, had started that September. So you hadn't proven yourself yet, and neither had the show. So this, to me, would be the most logical outcome. So the audience was very hardcore original series. They were skeptical, they were suspicious, and so they should have been. Up to this point, Star Trek had only consisted of the original crew. 1987 was also a very different time that bears absolutely no resemblance to today. Fans really didn't have to worry about the overt injection of identity politics back then. Their main concern was whether or not the show was going to be good. They were generally not terribly interested and completely unfamiliar with this new Star Trek, which had a bald English captain with a French name and an entirely new cast. This is called skepticism, which only makes sense. They only wanted their Kirk, Spock, and Bones Star Trek. Yes, because, once again, that's all they had known up to that point. He elaborated, "I had no idea what the world I had entered was going to be like. I had no idea what the experience was going to be like. I was a nervous wreck. Being a nervous wreck is understandable, but you must at least have had some idea of what you were getting into." The conversation then goes into Frakes' experience as Captain America before it's brought back to Star Trek. At around the 22-30 minute mark, Frakes is asked about when Star Trek The Original Series fans began to embrace the Next Generation cast and show. Frakes responded, "I don't think it was until the second or third year when the show got really good. And remember, we did 26 a year. That was a lot a year. That's 50, 60 shows in. People weren't really that hostile to the first two seasons, Frakes. Yes, they weren't the best, but they still had a following. And I would also add that those first two seasons didn't take a massive dump on everything Star Trek stood for. Quite the opposite, actually, and as a result, the show garnered enough goodwill for it to take off in season 3. He added, "They realized there was room in their world for both shows." And then Paramount, in its infinite wisdom and greed, produced Voyager and Deep Throat 9 and Enterprise, and it went on and on. That's a bit lowbrow and overly harsh and not completely truthful, Frakes. And even though most Star Trek fans love TNG, DS9 is usually, but not always, cited as being the better series. And then we shut down, and they shut down. Correction, Les Moonves shut it down just as Enterprise had really picked up steam, and it had become the equal of the original series, TNG, and DS9, in my opinion anyway. And JJ kept it under wraps until he produced the movies, which were wonderfully received. Correction, the first one was well received, the other two not so much, and didn't seem to have the same sort of resentment about being the new Trek. No, we resented the Kelvinverse because it became complete crap by the second and third films. Frakes then discussed the reception to Star Trek Discovery. But my friends at Discovery, which I was privileged to be a part of and still am, there was a similar vibe when that show came out. People, they didn't want to find room in their hearts for another Star Trek, which there clearly is. For the love of God, Frakes, people had been wanting a new Star Trek series for years, and the popularity of fan productions like Star Trek Continues, which would eventually be shut down by CBS, only further proved this. We wanted real Star Trek, We wanted good Star Trek. STD is none of those things. It's a dark, depressing, badly written show that seems completely oblivious, spiteful, and incompetent towards canon and what Star Trek stands for, with a terrible cast of characters with one of the most dislikable leads in television history. And that isn't even touching on the inherent problems with the political agenda. He then touched on Star Trek Picard. And one of the reasons that was not a factor in the launching of Picard is because the hardcore fans love Picard and were inclined to look forward to the show and look forward to having him and look forward to whatever the story because they knew him and they knew who he was. Yes, and even most Discovery haters were willing to give this show the benefit of the doubt. And what we got was not Picard. It was barely even a shadow of the character we had come to know on TNG. Yes, characters will develop and change with time, but this was a completely different character. Gone was the strong figure that had become a hero to many, and he had been replaced by someone that was weak in mind and character that demonstrated none of the strength and sheer force of will that exemplified the real Picard. And I think the familiarity with all fandom, it's so important. It's like the canon of these shows. They want a touch point. That's exactly what it is. And it's important. And it clearly worked because Picard was wonderful, Frakes added. No, this character was an insult to the actual character, and this show was an insult to real Star Trek. Some argue the familiarity that Frakes is talking about isn't there with Star Trek Picard. Since the show has aired, many fans have expressed their concern that Picard is not the Picard they knew, and the world the show inhabits is not Star Trek. Instead, it's a hollow and expensive CGI version of Star Trek. Yes, the world is not the Star Trek world. The Federation was supposed to represent a positive future for humanity. It was supposed to demonstrate how humanity had evolved, and yet we are supposed to believe that in the span of 20 years, it and Starfleet have become the Galactic Empire. Bullshit! And there was no subtlety to which real-world issues they were trying to take a one-sided view of. YouTuber Script Doctor, who I have had the pleasure of appearing on at least one live stream with, notes the problems with Star Trek Picard are very easy to see with its inconsistent story, plot holes, and cheap writing techniques that are used to hide obvious rewrites and reshoots. Well said, and I recommend checking out his video. In fact, as my very good friend Gary from Nerdrotic points out, Patrick Stewart told Variety that Picard was saying the world of Next Generation doesn't exist anymore. And it doesn't. The entire Star Trek world doesn't exist anymore. Stewart explained, I think what we're trying to say is important. The world of Next Generation doesn't exist anymore. It's different. Nothing is really safe. Nothing is really secure. Yes, Stewart, and the real Star Trek world was destroyed at your insistence. Gary goes on to note that Star Trek's current course chooses to ignore Gene Roddenberry's views of a hopeful future. Instead, what you get is in-your-face propaganda that has been thrown at fans for years now. And that's all it was. Propaganda. Well, that and terrible characters, terrible acting, terrible scripts, and the complete bastardization of multiple characters from the real Star Trek universe. Finally, the million-dollar question was asked. Host Mike Broder brings up there are a number of Star Trek fans who are unhappy with Picard, which are a lot, and most definitely a majority. Frakes responds, but they'll watch it. They're watching to make sure they hate it. And here we have it, folks. Another example of attacking your customers. No, Frakes, we didn't go into it hoping to hate it. Most of us went into it hoping that our concerns would be proven wrong, and they weren't. What we wanted was good Star Trek, which, outside of a few now cancelled fan projects, we haven't gotten that in years. There was goodwill going into this, and it was squandered. Spoiler warning, if you even care at this point. Set aside all the politics, and how did this show end? Picard is now an android. Yep, the lead character is now a robot. And even that was done for political reasons. Sorry, Frakes, but you've lost the respect of many a fan. And that's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. And as always, everyone, thank you for watching and have a great day.